quickening my pace as I passed a row of old, dilapidated houses that lined my neighborhood. The moon, half hidden behind clouds, provided little light, and the sound of my footsteps echoed off the silent buildings like a warning. I reached the corner where my house stood, and that's when I noticed it, a figure in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, or perhaps someone waiting for a cab. But as I drew closer, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The figure was motionless, standing in the middle of the street, staring at me. The dim light made it difficult to make out any details, but there was something about the way it stood, too still, too deliberate, that sent a cold chill racing down my spine. I hesitated, wondering whether I should approach or cross the street. The figure remained perfectly still, unmoving, almost as if it were waiting for something, or someone. I should have turned back, should have found a way to avoid whatever this was. But instead, my curiosity got the better of me. My legs, despite my better judgment, carried me forward, each step slower than the last. My heartbeat began to quicken, and a bead of sweat formed on my forehead, despite the cool air. As I drew closer, I finally saw it clearly. It was a man, or at least I thought it was. His features were obscured by a long, hooded coat, and the hood was pulled low over his face. His hands were clasped in front of him, and his body was rigid, almost inhumanly so. I stopped a few feet away, unsure of what to do, when the silence was broken. A voice, low and raspy, came from beneath the hood. "You should turn back." The words hit me like a slap to the face. My stomach lurched, and I took an involuntary step back. Who was this person? How did they know me? I couldn't make sense of it, couldn't find a logical explanation. I don't understand, I stammered, my voice barely audible. "What do you want?" The figure didn't move. Its head tilted slightly, as if considering my words, before it spoke again. "Turn back. You won't like what comes next." A chill ran down my spine, the air growing inexplicably colder. My mind raced, trying to find a way out of this situation. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was some kind of prank. I tried to reason with myself, tried to push away the growing sense of dread that gnawed at my insides. But something inside me told me this wasn't normal, that something was terribly wrong. I glanced around, searching for any sign of help. The street was still deserted, the houses around me silent. There was no one to hear my voice if I screamed. Why should I turn back? I asked, my voice shaky. The figure remained silent for a long moment, as though debating whether or not to respond. Finally, it spoke again, its voice even raspier than before, because what you seek is already too far gone. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, but I couldn't understand them. What did it mean? What was too far gone? "Please, I don't understand," I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure's hand slowly raised from beneath the cloak, and with a flick of its wrist, the air around me seemed to ripple, distorting the world in strange, unnatural ways. The streetlights flickered once again, but this time, they didn't return to their normal state. They flickered and then went completely dark, plunging the street into pitch blackness. I stood frozen in place, my breath caught in my throat. The darkness felt thick, almost tangible, pressing in on me from all sides. My heart raced, and panic began to surge through my veins. I reached into my pocket, fumbling for my phone, but I couldn't find it. My fingers were shaking too violently to hold anything properly. Then, just as suddenly as the darkness had come, it was gone. The lights flickered back on, though they now seemed dimmer, weaker. I blinked, disoriented, and when I looked back at the figure, it was gone. I searched the street, my pulse racing, but there was no sign of him. The street was empty again. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Something was horribly wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was connected to me. I had to get inside, away from this place, away from whatever had just happened. I spun on my heel and sprinted the short distance to my house, slamming the door behind me when I entered. I locked the door, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I leaned against the door, trying to steady my breath, but my body was tense, like a coiled spring. Something wasn't right. I could feel it. Presence watching me, waiting. But when I glanced around my living room, it was empty, nothing out of place. I stumbled into the kitchen, grabbing a glass of water in an attempt to calm my nerves. The water felt cold against my lips, but it did nothing to quell the tight knot of fear in my chest. I tried to rationalize what had happened, but nothing made sense. I needed to clear my head. Maybe I was just exhausted, or maybe it was the stress from work that had gotten to me. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just a trick of the mind, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was still out there waiting. I went upstairs to my bedroom and crawled into bed, hoping that sleep would bring some relief. But as soon as I closed my eyes, the image of the figure appeared in my mind. The eerie stillness of his body, the rasp of his voice, the way the world had twisted around me when he spoke. I tried to push it away, but the more I tried, the stronger the image became. I sat up in bed, drenched in sweat, my breathing shallow. The house was eerily quiet, but I knew, something was wrong. My hand reached for the lamp beside my bed, but before I could switch it on, I heard it, a faint, raspy whisper, coming from the darkness just beyond the edge of the room. You should have listened. The voice froze me in place, the words sinking deep into my chest like cold fingers wrapping around my heart. I turned, but there was nothing there. No figure, no movement, just the oppressive silence. But I could feel it, that same presence, closer now, surrounding me. I pulled the covers tight around me, trying to block out the feeling, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But then the whisper came again. Turn back. It's too late. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body was paralyzed, frozen in place by an unseen force. The room seemed to close in around me, and I could feel the darkness creeping at the edges of my vision. I couldn't move, couldn't escape. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the pressure lifted. The whispering stopped. The darkness faded, leaving me alone in the quiet of my room. I was gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was still. Nothing had changed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was just the beginning. I couldn't shake the feeling. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the oppressive silence of the room wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. Every little sound seemed magnified. The hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the creak of the house settling, the beat of my own heart, which felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I had to get a grip. I had to force myself to believe that what I experienced wasn't real. But no matter how many times I told myself that, the fear wouldn't let go. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't escape the growing sensation that it was coming for me. I threw the covers off, pushing myself to my feet. My legs were shaky, unsteady as I took slow, deliberate steps toward the window. I needed to look outside, to reassure myself that everything was fine. The world outside looked unchanged, quiet and still, bathed in the faint light of the moon. The street below was empty, save for the distant shadows of trees swaying in the wind. There was nothing. Nothing except the gnawing feeling deep within my gut that this was far from over. I shook my head, willing myself to think rationally. There was nothing out there. I was alone in my house, and I was safe. But that voice, the one that whispered in the dark, it echoed in my ears. It's too late. The words seemed to reverberate through my mind like a sickening mantra. I backed away from a window, my gaze darting around the room as if something might leap out from the shadows. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone, dialing the first number that came to mind, my best friend Lisa. I needed to hear a human voice, to anchor me to reality. The phone rang once, twice, before her voice finally broke through the ringing. "Hello," she answered, sounding groggy. "Lisa," I gasped, barely able to get the words out. "Something's wrong. I don't know what's happening, but I feel like I'm being watched." There was a brief silence on the other end, and then she responded, her tone softer now, more alert. "What do you mean? What happened?" I tried to explain, my words stumbling over each other in a desperate rush. I was walking home tonight, and I saw this figure. It didn't move, just stood there. And then, Lisa, something weird happened. The lights flickered, and it spoke to me. Told me to turn back. I didn't listen, and now I feel like something's coming for me. Her voice was calm, steady, trying to ground me. "You're probably just freaked out. It's been a long day, and you've got a lot on your mind. Maybe you just imagined it." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the memory of the figure, of the cold, eerie voice, burned too vividly in my mind. I don't think it was just my imagination. It was too real, Lisa. There was another long pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear her weighing her words before she spoke again. "Okay, look, why don't you come over? Stay here for the night. You'll feel better in the morning. It's probably just some weird experience. Nothing more." The idea of leaving the safety of my home was tempting, but something in my gut told me I shouldn't. I didn't know what it was, but I felt as if I'd be walking straight into danger if I left. I can't. I think I need to stay here. I don't know why, but I feel like if I leave, it will find me. "Listen," she said, her voice soft but insistent. "It's okay. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. You'll be safe with me. Just come over. You don't have to stay there alone." I hesitated, the decision weighing heavily on me, but my fear was overwhelming, and I didn't want to face whatever this was alone. "Okay," I whispered. "I'll come over." She promised she'd leave the door unlocked for me, and I hung up the phone, standing motionless in the center of my room. I stared around the space I had called home for years, a place that now felt foreign and threatening. The walls, which had once offered comfort, now seemed to loom over me. The stillness of the night wrapped its cold fingers around my soul, urging me to leave. I moved quickly, grabbing a jacket and pulling on my shoes. I had to get out, had to escape whatever was lurking in the shadows. As I opened the door to leave, I felt a familiar chill in the air, but it was different this time. It wasn't just the coolness of a late-night breeze. It felt like something more, something unnatural, a presence. I stepped outside, the night air thick and oppressive. The street was deserted, just as it had been earlier, but the feeling of being watched never left. I kept my head down, walking quickly down the sidewalk toward Lisa's house. Every step felt heavy, as if the ground itself was resisting my movement. My breath came in shallow gasps, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I half expected to see the figure standing there, watching me. But when I turned, there was nothing. The walk to Lisa's house felt longer than it ever had before. Every corner I turned, every empty street, seemed to stretch out endlessly, and with each passing moment, the fear in my chest grew stronger. I couldn't shake the thought that something was waiting for me, something that I couldn't see, but that I could feel with every fiber of my being. When I finally reached Lisa's house, I rushed up the steps and knocked on the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The door creaked open, and Lisa stood there, her face soft with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked, stepping aside to let me in. I nodded, though I didn't feel okay. I just wanted to be inside, to be somewhere safe. She led me to the living room, where I sank into the couch, my mind racing. "I don't know what's happening, Lisa," I whispered, my voice trembling. "It's like the world's shifting, like I'm not supposed to be here anymore." Lisa sat beside me, rubbing my back gently. "I don't know what you're going through, but you're here now and you're safe. Just try to relax." But as I sat there, I felt it again, the presence. It wasn't the same as before, but it was there, lurking just beyond the edges of my awareness, like a shadow at the corner of my vision. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even now. "Lisa," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I can't stay here. I need to go back home." "What? Are you sure?" she asked, her face contorted in confusion. "You just said you were scared. You can't go back out there." "I know," I said, my voice breaking, "but it's not safe here either. I can feel it. It's coming for me, no matter where I go." She reached for my hand, holding it tightly. "Don't say that. It's just your mind playing tricks on you. We'll figure this out together." But I could see the doubt in her eyes. She didn't understand. No one did. I didn't understand it either. But I knew deep down that there was something wrong, something that went far beyond what I could explain, something that had been set in motion the moment I didn't listen to the figure. The room suddenly felt colder, and the shadows around us deepened, stretching longer and longer as if they were alive. I glanced toward the window, and for a split second I saw it, the figure, standing outside, just beyond the glass. Its shape was obscured by the darkness, but I knew it was there. I felt it, the unmistakable weight of its gaze. I jumped to my feet, my heart racing as I backed away from the window. Lisa, startled by my sudden movement, stood up beside me, her eyes wide. "What's wrong?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. I had no words. The figure outside had moved. It was no longer standing still. It was moving, slowly, deliberately, coming closer to the house. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. The old house had always intrigued me. It stood on the outskirts of town, the kind of house you'd see in horror movies, with its decaying paint and crumbling foundation, surrounded by trees that blocked out the sun even in the middle of the day. I had heard the stories growing up. Everyone in town had a theory about the house, but no one dared to go near it. They spoke of strange noises coming from within, flickering lights, and glimpses of shadowy figures behind the cracked windows. It was the kind of place where you'd feel a chill run down your spine simply by looking at it. Yet, despite all the warnings, I couldn't shake the curiosity. It was like the house was calling me, a silent invitation to uncover its secrets. I had just turned 18 when I decided to venture into the house. Most of my friends had either left town or moved on with their lives, but I was still stuck in that small, uneventful town, yearning for something different. The house was the only mystery left. I'd seen it from a distance countless times, but today was different. Something inside me had snapped. Maybe it was the boredom of my life, or maybe it was just the need to prove that I wasn't afraid. I didn't know. What I did know was that I was going inside. As I approached the house, a sense of unease settled in my stomach. The air grew heavier, and the trees seemed to loom closer, their branches hanging down like gnarled fingers, blocking the sky. The front door was slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. A faint, musty smell wafted out, but it didn't deter me. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The floor creaked under my weight, and I immediately felt the temperature drop. My breath became visible in the air, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me. The interior of the house was even more unsettling than the exterior. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the floorboards seemed ready to give way at any moment. Dust hung thick in the air, and cobwebs clung to the corners. It was as if no one had lived here for decades. But there was something about the house that made me feel like it hadn't been abandoned at all. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling. Every step I took echoed through the empty halls, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I wandered through the house, unable to resist, exploring every room. The living room was filled with old, mismatched furniture, the cushions sagging from years of neglect. The fireplace was cold and empty, but I noticed something strange, a single photograph resting on the mantel. I picked it up, and my heart skipped a beat. It was a picture of family, but their faces were scratched out, as though someone had deliberately tried to erase them. A chill ran down my spine, and I dropped the photo back onto the mantel. I moved on, my curiosity growing with every step. The kitchen was covered in layers of grime, with dishes still left in the sink, as though the previous occupants had just abandoned everything in a hurry. There were no signs of life, but the strange feeling of being watched intensified with each passing moment. I made my way up the creaky stairs, my pulse quickening. I had to see the second floor. I had to know what lay beyond the heavy door at the end of the hallway. As I reached the top of the stairs, I noticed a door at the far end of the hall. It was slightly ajar, the faint light from the window beyond casting eerie shadows on the floor. Something about it pulled me in, and against my better judgment, I walked toward it. The closer I got, the colder the air became. It was as though the room behind that door was holding its breath, waiting for me to enter. I pushed the door open, and what I saw nearly made me stumble backward in shock. The room was unlike any of the others. It was pristine, untouched by time. The furniture was new, the floors polished, and the walls were painted a deep shade of blue, almost too vibrant to be real. But the strangest part of the room was the mirror on the far wall. It was large, almost too large for the room, its frame ornate and gilded with gold. It was the only thing in the house that seemed out of place, and I couldn't help but feel drawn to it. I walked toward the mirror, my reflection staring back at me. But something was wrong. My face looked distorted, almost as if it were moving on its own, changing with every blink. I stepped closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Suddenly, the reflection shifted, and I saw someone, standing behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. My heart raced in my chest, and I backed away from the mirror, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I had to get out of here, but as I turned to leave, I heard it, a soft whisper, like a breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, but there was still no one there. The whisper came again, this time clearer. You shouldn't be here. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't alone. The house wasn't abandoned. Something or someone was here with me. I could feel it now, the weight of their presence, like a shadow hanging just behind me. My mind raced as I scrambled for an explanation. Could it be a prank? Someone hiding in the house, playing tricks on me? No, it didn't feel like that. This was real. I could feel the eyes on me, the pressure building around me like the walls were closing in. I bolted for the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. But as I reached for the handle, it wouldn't budge. It was stuck. Panic rose in my throat as I tugged harder, but it remained locked. I was trapped. The whispers grew louder now, surrounding me, echoing off the walls, growing in intensity until it felt like they were inside my head. Leave, 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 the voice repeated, each word more desperate, more urgent than the last. I backed away from the door, my mind racing for a way out. The mirror caught my eye again, and I instinctively looked over at it. My reflection was no longer my own. It was distorted, like something was trying to break free from the glass. The face in the mirror twisted, stretching into a grotesque grin. "You should have left when you had the chance," it hissed. I screamed, but no sound escaped my lips. My heart pounded in my chest as the room around me seemed to close in, the walls bending, warping. The air grew thick, suffocating, and I could feel something cold wrapping around me, pulling me toward the mirror. I struggled, clawing at the air, but it was no use. The grip of whatever force was in that room was too strong. It was dragging me toward the mirror, and I couldn't fight it. I had no choice but to let it pull me in. Just as I thought I would be swallowed whole by the mirror, the world around me went black. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My body felt heavy, as though I were pinned down by something invisible. Every inch of me screamed to get up, to escape whatever this place was. But my muscles refused to respond. My mind screamed at me to fight it, but my body remained still, paralyzed by something I couldn't understand. It was as though I were trapped in a space between worlds, suspended in some kind of limbo. I struggled against it for what felt like an eternity, but I couldn't break free from the stillness. And then I felt it, a faint pressure, barely perceptible at first, but it grew, spreading like tendrils around me. Someone was there with me, in the darkness, close enough that I could feel its presence. My heart raced, my breath catching my throat. I wasn't alone. The room, or whatever this place was not empty. I wasn't the only one here. My pulse quickened as I strained against the unseen weight on me, but it was no use. The darkness clung to me like tar, pulling me back, holding me still. A whisper cut through the silence, but it wasn't like the whispers from before. This voice was deeper, older, and more insistent. "You shouldn't have come." It was a voice I didn't recognize, yet it sounded familiar, like a forgotten memory that lurked at the back of my mind, just beyond my reach. My eyes strained in the darkness, but there was nothing. No figure, no shape, just the crushing weight of the dark around me. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through my chest, and I gasped, my breath coming in jagged bursts. It was as if something was digging into me from the inside, squeezing the air from my lungs. Panic surged, and I fought against the invisible force holding me down, but my body refused to obey. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I felt like I was being suffocated by the air itself. The voice spoke again, this time closer, its breath hot on my ear. "You are in my world now." I screamed, or I tried to, but again, no sound came from my mouth. The suffocating grip around my chest tightened, and the air grew colder still. It felt as though the very essence of the darkness was alive and aware of me, of my fear. It was feeding on it. It thrived on it. I don't know how long I was trapped there, in that suffocating darkness, the whispers of the voice wrapping around me, pulling me deeper into whatever nightmare I had stumbled into. It felt like days, weeks, even though I knew it had only been moments. Time no longer seemed to exist in this place. It was as though the very concept of time had been ripped away, leaving me suspended in this void. But then, Just as the pain in my chest began to fade, something changed. The darkness seemed to shift. The weight that had been pressing down on me lessened. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I felt my limbs begin to move again. It was as if the grip on me had loosened, just enough to give me a chance to escape. I took a deep, shaky breath, the cold air burning my lungs as I forced myself to sit up. I could feel the ground beneath me, rough and uneven, but I couldn't see anything. The blackness was absolute. I moved cautiously, my hands reaching out into the void, trying to find something, anything, to orient myself. My fingers brushed against something smooth, something solid, a wall. I pressed my hand against it, trying to gather my bearings. There was something here, something more than just this emptiness. I could feel it. Then the voice returned. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a guttural, growling sound, reverberating through the walls around me. "You cannot escape," it hissed. "You are mine now." I recoiled, pulling away from a wall as if it had burned me. But then I realized something. I wasn't alone, not just in the physical sense, but in the metaphysical one. This place wasn't just empty space. It was alive, like a living, breathing entity. I had walked into something ancient, something that shouldn't have existed, and now it was holding me here. The realization made my blood run cold. I couldn't stay here. I had to escape. But how? I reached out again, my hand grazing along the wall, try to find some way out. As my fingers brushed along the surface, I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my arm. I gasped and pulled back, but the pain didn't go away. It burned, searing into my skin, as if something had torn through me. I looked down at my arm, expecting to see blood, but there was nothing. No mark, no wound. It was as if the very air had sliced into me. The darkness was feeding on me. I knew then that I had to act fast. Whatever was holding me here, whatever this place was, it didn't want me to leave. It wanted to consume me, break me down until there was nothing left. The voice spoke again, this time louder, echoing through the space like it was coming from every direction at once. "You are not worthy to leave," it growled, its tone filled with venom. I felt a surge of defiance rise within me. I couldn't let it win. I couldn't let this thing break me. I had to find a way out, or I would become just another lost soul trapped in its grip, just another forgotten part of this forsaken place. My body trembled, but I forced myself to stand, my legs wobbling beneath me as I tried to gain my footing. Every part of me screamed to stop, to give in, but I couldn't. I had to survive. I pushed forward, my hand still against the wall, as I felt my way through the suffocating darkness. The pressure of the air around me seemed to grow heavier with every step, as if the very weight of this place was pressing down on me, trying to crush me. But I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. And then I felt it, a shift in the air, a change in the pressure. The wall before me seemed to give way, like a door had just opened, letting in a faint flicker of light. My heart leapt in my chest as I moved toward it, every step feeling like it was taking me closer to salvation. The light was faint, just a glimmer, but it was enough. It was enough to guide me, and as I moved closer to the light, I realized with a sudden, horrifying clarity that the voice had stopped. The air went still, and the silence that followed was suffocating. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. The light in front of me flickered like a candle about to go out, but it wasn't just the flickering that unsettled me. It was the unnatural stillness that surrounded it. No whispers, no pressure, no presence of the dark, suffocating force that had been holding me prisoner just moments before. I took a deep breath, but even that felt foreign, as if my lungs were no longer accustomed to filling with air. My body moved forward before my mind could catch up, almost as if some force beyond my control was urging me on. guiding me toward the faint light. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the air, and I felt a sudden warmth. It was like stepping out of a freezing cold room into the warmth of sunlight. My body reacted instinctively, drawing in the warmth, savoring the sensation like a starved creature in the desert. But it wasn't sunlight. The light didn't have that golden glow. It was more ethereal, otherworldly, almost unnatural, as if it didn't belong in this place. Yet, I couldn't help but feel drawn to it. I stepped forward again, my foot touching the ground with a soft thud. And then it happened. The light expanded outward, the edges folding back like the petals of a flower opening. A rush of air swept through the space, warm and welcoming, but also unsettling, as if the air itself had a will. I took another step, my senses alert, every muscle in my body on edge. And then I saw it. The room, or whatever this place was, unfolded before me. It wasn't just a void anymore. The darkness had lifted, revealing a cavernous, desolate space, stretching out as far as the eye could see. The walls were smooth, curving inward, like the inside of a massive shell, and I could see strange symbols etched into the surface. They weren't like anything I had ever seen before, not any language or writing I could recognize. The air was thick with dust, the particles floating lazily in the light that now surrounded me. But despite the silence, I could feel something. Something watching, waiting. I scanned the room, my breath coming quicker, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I could feel the light's warmth radiating from somewhere in the distance, but I had no idea where it was coming from. It wasn't from the ceiling. There was no ceiling, no visible source of light. It was just there, a soft glow that seemed to fill the space. My eyes darted from one side of the room to the other, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But everything was distorted, warped. The walls seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them, like they were breathing, moving. I couldn't make sense of it, couldn't ground myself in the space. My heart raced in my chest, my thoughts scattered. Then I heard it, a sound so faint at first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. A scraping, like something dragging across stone. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. My breath caught in my throat, and I instinctively looked behind me. But the room was empty. The silence had returned, thick and heavy. But there was no mistaking it. The sound was real. It was closer now. I spun back around, my eyes searching the shadows for any sign of movement, but I saw nothing. The scraping sound came again, this time louder, more distinct. It was coming from the far corner of the room. A shadow shifted there, stretching out like a tendril, pulling itself along the ground. I stumbled backward, my heart slamming against my ribcage. The air was thick with the scent of earth, of decay. As the shadow grew longer, closer, my mind raced. I had to get out. I had to. But then the voice returned. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the walls of the space, echoing in my skull. You should never have come. The words slithered into my ears, wrapping around my mind, sinking into my thoughts like poison. I clutched my head, trying to block it out, but the voice persisted, growing louder, more demanding. This place is not for you. You are nothing but a trespasser here. I backed away, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get away from whatever was making that sound. But my legs felt like lead. The light, whatever it was fading now, dimming as the shadows crept closer. I could see them now. Figures, shapes, distorted, hunched forms that emerged from the darkness. They were humanoid, but wrong, twisted and malformed, like they were not meant to be seen by human eyes. The first one crawled forward, dragging itself across the floor with a grotesque, jerking motion. Its limbs were too long, its skin pale and stretched, almost translucent. I could see the veins underneath, pulsating, like something alive beneath a fragile surface. Its eyes were black pits, devoid of anything human. It didn't have a mouth, or at least not one that I could see, but I could hear it breathing, low, ragged, as if it was struggling to stay alive. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I could only watch, frozen in place, as it came closer, its movements deliberate, slow. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. My body refused to move, refused to react. I was trapped, my own body betraying me, refusing to respond to the panic that surged inside me. The creature came closer, and I could see the others now, emerging from the shadows, crawling along the floor like insects. They were all the same, twisted, distorted, their forms barely recognizable. I could hear the scraping sound again, as though they were dragging their broken bodies across the floor. Inch by inch, they were getting closer, surrounding me, and I could feel the air growing colder, heavier with each passing second. The voice returned, now a chorus of whispers, 1,000 voices speaking at once. "You should never have come," they said, their words overlapping, blending into one another. "This is our world. This is our domain." I couldn't look away from the creatures. Their eyes, dark and endless, seemed to bore into me, each one filled with malice, hunger, and something worse, something that made my blood run cold. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And then, a single word echoed through my mind. Escape. It wasn't a thought I had. It wasn't something I consciously considered. It was simply there, like an instinct, like an undeniable truth that had been buried deep within me. Escape. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog from my thoughts, try and make sense of what was happening, but it was impossible. I couldn't think. I couldn't reason. I had to act. I turned, forced myself to turn, and with all the strength I could muster, I pushed my body forward, moving toward the distant light. The creatures screeched behind me, their twisted limbs scraping against the floor as they pursued me. Their cries were deafening, echoing through the cavernous space, filling my ears with a sound that was nothing short of maddening. I could feel their presence behind me, closing in, but I didn't dare look back. The light was my only hope. The warmth, the safety it promised. It was the only thing keeping me going. I ran, stumbling over the uneven ground, my feet slipping on the dusty floor. The creatures were right behind me now, so close that I could feel their cold breath on the back of my neck, their fingers grazing my skin. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I pushed forward, ignoring the pain, ignoring the terror that gripped me. I had to escape. I reached for the light, my fingers brushing against it, and for a moment, I thought it was just an illusion, a trick of the mind. But then something shifted. The air around me thickened, and the light grew brighter, more intense. It enveloped me, wrapping around me like a cocoon, and for a brief moment, I felt peace. The creatures screeched in fury as I was pulled into the light, their voices fading into the distance. The warmth surged through me, filling me with a sense of safety, of refuge. I closed my eyes, letting the light consume me, and for the first time since I had entered this nightmarish place, I felt like I could breathe again. But even as the light surrounded me, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The darkness, the creatures, the voice, they were still there waiting. And I had a sinking feeling that no matter how far I ran, no matter how much I tried to escape, they would always find me. They would always come for me. I didn't know how I knew it. I didn't know how I understood it. But I did. This was only the beginning. It started with a phone call. A simple, familiar ring that echoed through my dimly lit apartment, pulling me from a restless sleep. I glanced at the clock, 2:17 a.m. A cold unease settled in my stomach as I reached for my phone, the number on the screen unfamiliar. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello." My voice was hoarse, thick with sleep. At first, there was nothing. Silence. Not the kind where you hear static or breathing, but a deep, unnatural void. I waited, my heartbeat quickening. Then, just as I was about to hang up, a whisper slithered through the receiver. "Did you lock the door?" The words sent a shiver down my spine. My apartment door was always locked. I made sure of it before bed. A nervous chuckle escaped my lips. "Who is this?" Silence again. Then the call ended. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Maybe it was a prank, some idiot playing a late-night joke. But as I turned toward my bedroom door, a sickening realization crawled up my spine. The faintest sliver of light was visible under my bedroom door, light coming from a hallway. I hadn't left any lights on. A cold sweat broke across my skin as I swung my legs over the bed, moving as quietly as I could. The silence in the apartment was thick, oppressive. I reached for the baseball bat I kept beside my nightstand, gripping it tightly. My breath was shallow, controlled. I stood, inching toward the door, my bare feet making no sound on the wooden floor. I pressed my ear against the door, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No rustling. Just the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Swallowing hard, I tightened my grip on the bat and, in one swift motion, yanked the door open. The hallway was empty, but the light was on. I scanned the area, my eyes darting between the living room and kitchen. Everything looked normal. The windows were closed. The locks on the front door were in place. But the unease didn't leave me. Something felt wrong. I moved toward the light switch, flipping it off. Darkness swallowed the room, but as I turned back toward my bedroom, my stomach twisted into a knot. There were footprints on the floor. Wet, muddy footprints leading from the front door to my bedroom. My breath hitched. My body locked in place. I had been home all night. No one had come in. No one should have come in. Yet the footprints were there, glistening faintly under the dim glow of the streetlight filtering through the blinds. Then the phone rang again. The same unknown number. My hands trembled as I picked it up, my throat dry. I pressed it to my ear, my voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" A deep chuckle. Low, guttural. "I like watching you." I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. The room was empty. The shadows stretched long and menacing across the walls. My breathing turned ragged, uneven. I backed away, inching toward the kitchen, my hand groping blindly for a knife from the counter. "Get out of my house," I hissed. Another chuckle. "I never left." The line went dead. A sharp creak sounded behind me. I whirled around, my grip on the knife tightening. The closet door, the one near the entrance, was slightly ajar. My pulse pounded in my ears. I forced myself to move, my legs feeling like lead as I approached it. With a trembling hand, I reached out and pulled the door open. Nothing, just my coats hanging limply in the darkness. I exhaled shakily, stepping back. Maybe I was losing it. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Then I saw it, a smudge of something dark on the inside of the closet door. I leaned in, my stomach twisting violently as I realized what it was. A fingerprint, smudged, streaked, and right next to it, in jagged, hurried letters, a message carved into the wood. "See you soon." A cold gust of air brushed against my neck. I spun around, and the lights went out. The darkness was absolute. I could feel it pressing in around me, thick and suffocating, swallowing every outline of my apartment. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, and my pulse pounded so loudly in my ears that I could barely hear anything else. The air felt heavier, as if something unseen had slipped into the room with me. Something waiting, watching. My fingers tightened around the handle of the knife. The cold steel a poor comfort against the rising terror in my chest. I forced myself to take a step back, my bare foot brushing against the cool wooden floor. I couldn't see, couldn't tell if anything had moved in the darkness. My apartment, which had always been a small, familiar space, now felt vast and foreign. Every sound was magnified. The distant hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock, my own uneven breathing, and then, amidst the silence, something else. A soft whisper. It was barely audible, a breath against the void, but I knew I had heard it. A murmur, a sound that did not belong to me. It came from the direction of my bedroom. My stomach twisted into knots. I needed to move. I needed to get out of this apartment. My mind screamed at me to turn, to run for the door, to leave everything behind, but my body refused to obey. Frozen in place as if some unseen force held me there. I could feel the weight of something watching me, the unbearable sensation of eyes fixed on my every movement. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe, to focus. Slowly, cautiously, I began to inch toward the light switch. My fingers trembled as I reached out, searching blindly for the switch on the wall. I needed to see. I needed to confirm that I was alone, that my mind was playing tricks on me. Just as my fingertips brushed against the plastic switch, something moved. Not a creak, not a whisper. A deliberate, slow shift in the darkness. I felt it more than I heard it. A presence just beyond my line of sight, lurking at the edge of the void. My blood ran cold. My body screamed at me to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there like a helpless victim. But then, before I could react, before I could even process the terror fully, the lights flickered back on, and my bedroom door was wide open. A wave of nausea crashed over me. I had left it closed. I was sure of it. The door hadn't been open when I stepped out into the hallway, and yet now it yawned before me, revealing nothing but the darkened interior of my room. I took a shaky step forward, knife raised, my breath coming in quick, panic bursts. The wet footprints were still on the floor, trailing into my bedroom. The muddy imprints were fresh, the pattern uneven, like someone had been dragging their feet. A low, suffocated sob clawed its way up my throat. This couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare, some terrible hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But the weight of the knife in my hand was real. The cold sweat on my skin was real. The dread coiling in my gut was real. The phone rang again. I nearly screamed. The shrill, piercing sound shattered the suffocating silence, making my entire body jolt. My hand was shaking so violently that I almost dropped the knife as I turned toward the counter where my phone sat. Its screen glowing ominously in the dim light. The same number. I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to hear that voice again. But something compelled me, some desperate, terrified need to know what was happening to me. With a trembling hand, I picked up the phone and pressed it to my ear. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. For a moment, there was silence. Then the whisper. I'm inside. The line went dead. A choked gasp escaped my lips, and the phone slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the counter. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I spun toward my bedroom, my grip tightening around the knife, my eyes darting wildly across the room. Nothing. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on me like a suffocating weight. I could feel something there, something lurking just beyond my vision, waiting. My bedroom door stood open, the darkness inside thick and impenetrable. I had two choices: run, or face whatever was in that room. My instinct screamed at me to flee, to throw open the front door and run into the night without looking back. But some deeper, primal part of me knew that it wouldn't matter. I could run, I could leave the apartment, but whatever this was, it wouldn't stop. It would follow. It would find me. I took a step forward. Then another. My heart slammed against my ribs with each movement, my breath shallow and uneven. The wooden floor beneath my feet creaked softly as I approached the doorway, the shadows inside shifting ever so slightly. I raised the knife, my fingers slick with sweat, and then, in the darkness, something breathed. A deep, slow inhale. Right next to me. I lunged forward, swinging the knife wildly, my pulse a deafening roar in my ears. The blade sliced through empty air, the momentum nearly pulling me off balance. I staggered, my breath hitching, my entire body trembling. The room was empty. The shadows stretched long across the walls, the pale glow of the streetlights outside casting eerie shapes on the floor. My bed was untouched, the blankets slightly rumpled from when I had left them earlier. The closet door was closed. There was no one there, but I had heard it. I had felt it. I backed away, my skin crawling with the sensation of unseen eyes still watching me. My entire body was shaking now, my vision blurring with the sheer force of my fear. I needed to get out. I needed to leave this place before. The closet door creaked. Every muscle in my body locked. My grip tightened around the knife. My lungs burned with the effort of holding my breath. And then the door began to open. Slowly, deliberately. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My vision tunneled, my entire world narrowing to that thin, growing sliver of darkness behind the door. A hand emerged first. Pale, thin, the fingers impossibly long, curling against the wooden frame with an agonizing slowness. Then the face. I couldn't scream. The sound died in my throat, choked by sheer, mind-numbing terror. The face was wrong, stretched hollow, its mouth twisted into something that was neither a smile nor a grimace. The eyes black, endless, empty, locked onto mine, and I felt something inside me break. I turned and ran. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I bolted from the room, my feet slamming against the floor, my pulse hammering against my ribs like a war drum. I reached the front door, fumbling desperately with the locks, my fingers slipping against the cold metal in my panic. Behind me, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. I wrenched the door open and stumbled into the hallway, slamming it shut behind me. The lights in the corridor flickered, casting long, erratic shadows along the walls. My breath came in ragged, heaving gasps as I pressed my back against the door, my mind racing. And then, from the other side of the door, a whisper. You can't run forever. The door handle twisted. I turned and sprinted down the hall, not daring to look back. The cold air of the hallway hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop running. My bare feet pounded against the linoleum floor as I bolted down the corridor of my apartment building, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The overhead lights flickered erratically, casting warped, shifting shadows along the walls. I didn't dare look behind me. I didn't need to. I could feel it. The presence. The thing that had been inside my apartment. The thing that had whispered through the phone. That had carved those words into my closet door. It was still there. Still watching. And I knew, without a doubt, it was following me. I reached the stairwell and threw myself against the metal door, nearly stumbling as I forced it open. The stairwell was dimly lit, the yellowish bulbs casting long, distorted shadows that slithered across the concrete walls. The air smelled musty, damp. I took the stairs two at a time, gripping the railings so tightly my knuckles ached. The pounding in my chest wasn't just from exertion. It was fear, deep, primal terror, clawing its way up my throat, threatening to choke me. As I rounded the second flight of stairs, I heard it. A footstep. Not mine. Soft, deliberate. Just one. Somewhere above me. I froze mid-step, my breath catching in my throat. The stairwell was silent now, save for the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering in my ears. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just the echo of my own footsteps. But I knew better. I turned my head ever so slightly, just enough to glance up the staircase. A shadow moved. My heart nearly stopped. It was there. Not fully visible, just the faintest, shifting outline. Something lurking in the dimness above me, watching, waiting. I ran. I didn't care how loud my footsteps were. Didn't care about anything except getting as far away from that thing as possible. I sprinted down the remaining flights of stairs, nearly tripping over myself in my desperation. The exit was just ahead, the door leading to the lobby. I reached it and slammed my hand against the push bar. A strangled sob of frustration escaped my lips. This door was never locked. The building wasn't the safest, and the management barely maintained it, but they never locked the lobby doors. My hand scrambled at the handle, rattling it, pulling, yanking nothing. Then I heard it again. A footstep. Closer this time. I turned my head, my breath hitching. The stairwell behind me was empty, but the shadows felt wrong, deeper than they should have been. Something was there. Something was waiting in that darkness, just out of sight. Then the lights flickered. For the briefest moment, the stairwell was plunged into absolute darkness. And in that fraction of a second, I saw it. A face. Not human. Not even close. It was inches from mine. Its features stretched, distorted. Hollow eyes boring into me. Mouth twisted in something that might have been a smile but wasn't. Its breath was cold. Icy tendrils creeping across my skin. I felt my mind teetering on the edge of something terrible. Something I couldn't comprehend. The lights flickered back on, and it was gone. I stumbled backward, my body trembling violently. I was trapped. The front door was locked. The stairwell was no longer an option. My only hope was the maintenance door leading to the basement. It was always left open for the building staff. I didn't want to go into the basement, but I had no choice. My legs felt unsteady as I turned and ran toward the basement door, my hand shaking so badly that it took me 3 tries to grip the handle properly. It swung open with a groan, revealing a set of concrete steps leading downward into darkness. A damp, stale smell wafted up to greet me. I hesitated, just for a second. Then I heard the door behind me creak open. I didn't look back. I threw myself into the basement, yanking the door shut behind me. The stairwell was narrow, the walls lined with exposed pipes that dripped condensation onto the floor. The only light came from a single flickering bulb near the bottom of the stairs, casting sickly yellow illumination over the concrete floor. The air was thick, humid, suffocating. My heartbeat felt like a drum in my chest as I crept down the steps, each one creaking beneath my weight. I reached the bottom and pressed myself against the cold concrete wall, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. The basement stretched before me, a maze of rusted storage lockers, old janitorial equipment, and broken furniture. A single hallway led deeper into the basement, where the maintenance room was. I had to move. I forced myself forward, stepping carefully, my hands clenched into fists. Every sound felt amplified, the drip of water from the pipes, the distant hum of machinery, the rhythmic pounding of my own pulse. Then I heard the whisper. It was close, too close. I spun around, my eyes darting over the basement. The shadows shifted, moved, as if something had just slipped behind one of the storage units. My stomach twisted painfully. I wasn't alone down here. Something was breathing in the darkness. I forced myself to keep moving, each step feeling heavier, slower. The hallway leading to the maintenance room stretched before me, the flickering light above casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. The door was in sight. I was almost there. A soft scrape echoed behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I reached the door and grabbed the handle, my fingers shaking as I twisted it. It was unlocked. Relief flooded through me as I pushed it open and stumbled inside, slamming the door shut behind me. The room was small, cluttered with old electrical panels, toolboxes, and a workbench covered in dust. A single exposed bulb hung from the ceiling, its light swaying slightly as if disturbed by a breeze. Except there was no breeze. I backed up against the wall, my entire body trembling. I had no plan, no idea what to do next. I couldn't stay here forever, but if I left, something scratched against the door. My breath hitched, my hands clenched into fists. Then, slowly, the door handle began to turn. Not fast, not violently. Slowly, deliberately. I pressed myself harder against the wall, every muscle in my body locked in terror. The door handle twisted all the way, then stopped. A beat of silence, then the whisper, "You can't hide from me." The bulb above me flickered, and the door creaked open. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there frozen in place. But as the door swung open, revealing nothing but pitch-black darkness beyond, I knew it had finally found me. The first time I heard it, I thought it was just the house settling, a soft creak in the dead of night, a whisper of wood shifting against itself. This house was old, older than I was, older than my father, maybe even older than his father. It had been in our family for generations, and when my parents passed, I inherited it, a massive, looming Victorian relic, standing alone at the edge of a thick forest. It had been empty for years before I moved in, and for the first few nights, the silence pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. But silence I could handle. It was the noises that came after that unsettled me. At first, it was just small things. The floorboards creaking when I wasn't walking, doors shifting slightly as if nudged by a passing breeze, faint tapping sounds that I assumed were tree branches scraping against the windows. Then came the whispers. At night, when I lay in bed, I could hear them, soft murmurs, just beyond my understanding. I'd sit up, straining my ears, and the moment I moved, they would stop. I told myself it was my imagination, that the loneliness and isolation were playing tricks on me. But deep down, something inside me felt wrong. One night, the whispers turned into something else. I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, moving slowly toward my bedroom door. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for my phone, only to realize that the battery was dead. I held my breath, waiting. The footsteps stopped just outside my door. I could hear breathing, low, raspy, as if someone was struggling to take air into their lungs. I wanted to scream, to jump out of bed and turn on the light, but I was frozen. The handle of the door rattled, slowly turning. I bolted upright and switched on the lamp. Silence. Nothing but the empty hallway staring back at me when I finally found the courage to open the door. Sleep became an impossible thing after that. I started hearing knocking from inside the walls, rhythmic and insistent. At first, I thought it might be rodents trapped within, but the knocks would only happen when I was alone, in the dead of night, always in patterns that felt too deliberate. And then the shadows came. I would see them from the corner of my eye, dark shapes moving against the walls, shifting unnaturally. Once, while brushing my teeth, I glanced up at the mirror and saw something standing behind me. A tall, hunched figure with hollow eyes staring into mine. I spun around, but there was nothing there. I stopped using the mirror after that. The worst came when I finally decided to leave. I couldn't take it anymore. Every fiber of my being told me I wasn't alone, that something in this house wanted me to stay. Or worse, wanted something from me. I packed a bag in the middle of the night, too terrified to wait until morning. As I reached for the front door, every door in the house slammed shut at once. The walls trembled as a deep, guttural growl echoed through the halls. The lights flickered violently, and a searing cold wrapped around me like icy fingers gripping my skin. I ran to the door, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Something was holding it shut. My breath came in frantic gasps as I turned to see the shadows congealing in the hallway, forming shapes tall, Distorted figures with elongated limbs and empty faces. They stood motionless, watching me. Then, the whispering returned, louder this time, as if 1,000 voices were speaking at once. My head throbbed with the sound, the words twisting into something dark, something ancient. My vision blurred, and I felt my knees give out beneath me. I don't remember hitting the floor, only the sensation of sinking, falling into a vast emptiness, swallowed by the dark. When I woke up, it was morning. The house was silent. The doors were open, the air still. But something was different. The walls felt closer, the ceiling lower. And the whispers, they weren't coming from the shadows anymore. They were inside me. I never left the house after that. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. No matter how many times I tried, I would wake up right where I started, as if the night had never ended. Time became meaningless. The shadows no longer lingered in the corners. They moved freely now, watching me in broad daylight. I tried to scream, but the sound never came. I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't move. It was as if the house had claimed me, made me a part of it. My body was here, but my mind, my soul, felt like it was slipping away, pulled into the endless dark that surrounded me. And then, one night, the whispers spoke my name. The moment the whispers spoke my name, I felt something inside me break. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was something deeper, something primal. My name, carried by voices that didn't belong to any living thing, slithered through the air like an invisible hand reaching into my chest. I tried to move, to shake off the feeling, but my body remained frozen. My breath came in shallow gasps as I stared at the walls, at the shadows that had once only lurked in the periphery, but now stood before me, fully formed and watching. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself it wasn't real, that it was just my mind unraveling. Maybe I had been alone too long. Maybe the isolation had played tricks on me. But when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my house anymore. The walls had shifted. The hallway stretched longer than it should, the doors along it vanishing into an endless corridor of darkness. The ceiling loomed higher, pressing down with an invisible weight. The air felt thick, dense, as if I were wading through something unseen. The temperature had dropped, but I felt heat pressing against my skin, like something was watching from just behind me, breathing against my neck. I turned around slowly, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run. The figure stood in front of me, no longer a shadow, no longer shifting. It had taken shape. It was tall, unnaturally so, its limbs thin and elongated, its head slightly tilted as if it were studying me. Its face, or what should have been its face, was smooth, featureless, except for the hollows where I should have been. And then it moved, not in the way a person moves, not in steps or strides, but in flickers, like an old film skipping frames. One moment, it was standing in the hallway. The next, it was inches from my face. I staggered backward, my body finally responding to the sheer terror flooding through me. But there was nowhere to go. The walls had closed in. There was no door anymore. The whispers turned into a chorus, overlapping voices speaking words I didn't understand, yet somehow I felt them inside me, crawling beneath my skin, filling my head with a pressure that threatened to crush me. Then the thing spoke, not with words, not with a voice, but with something deeper, something that bypassed sound and went straight into my mind. You belong here now. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My own voice had abandoned me. The walls of the house shifted again, bending, warping, until I wasn't sure if I was standing or falling. The light around me dimmed, and I felt myself sinking, not physically, but something inside me, something being pulled away. I clawed at my own arms, as if I could hold on to myself, but it was useless. The pressure in my skull intensified, an unbearable weight pressing down, forcing me to my knees. And then silence, a stillness so absolute it made my ears ring. I gasped, realizing I could move again, my limbs trembling as I pushed myself upright. The house was back. The hallway was normal again, the doors where they should be. The figure was gone. Had it been real, or had I blacked out? I touched my face, my skin cold and damp with sweat. My heart was still pounding, the adrenaline still coursing through me. But everything looked normal. My phone sat on the table where I had left it. The clock on the wall ticked softly. The air no longer pressed against me like a suffocating weight, but something was different. I felt it before I saw it. The mirror in the hallway. I didn't want to look, but my body moved on its own. Slowly, step by step, I approached it. My reflection stared back, my face pale, my eyes hollow. But it was me. It was normal. Until it blinked. I didn't. My reflection smiled. I stumbled backward, but the image in the mirror remained still, grinning in a way that twisted my stomach into knots. It was my face, but it wasn't me. The whispers started again. This time, they weren't coming from the walls. They were inside the mirror. I turned to run, but the hallway stretched again, elongating impossibly, trapping me. My reflection stepped forward, pressing its hands against the glass. I could see its lips moving, forming words I couldn't hear, but I didn't need to. I already knew what it was saying. You're not you anymore. A sharp pain shot through my head, and suddenly, memories flooded my mind. Not my memories. Things I had never seen, never experienced. Dark places, endless corridors, figures standing in corners, watching, waiting. A feeling of being trapped, lost. 1,000 lifetimes of being stuck inside something that wasn't real. I clutched my head, squeezing my eyes shut, but the images kept coming. Then, a single whisper, louder than the rest. Let me in. I opened my eyes, and my reflection wasn't in the mirror anymore. It was standing behind me. Its hand gripped my shoulder, ice-cold fingers sinking into my skin. I tried to pull away, but I couldn't move. I watched in horror as its mouth stretched open, wider, until it was an abyss, a black void swallowing all light. I felt myself being pulled, dragged into that darkness, my body collapsing as my mind was yanked into something else, something vast and endless. The last thing I saw before everything went black was my own body standing up, straightening its posture, adjusting its clothes. My reflection, no, not me, smiled one last time before walking away, leaving me behind in the dark. And then I understood. I wasn't in my house anymore. I was in the mirror, watching, waiting. The moment realization struck, a wave of sheer panic surged through me. I threw myself against the glass, pounding with both fists, screaming with every ounce of strength I had left. But no sound escaped. My voice had been stripped from me, stolen by the thing that now walked around in my body. I watched helplessly as it moved through my home, adjusting to its new skin, rolling my shoulders, stretching my fingers like testing a fresh suit. My own face grinned back at me, but the eyes, those weren't mine. They were deeper, darker, filled with something unnatural, something ancient. I tried again, slamming my fists against the cold surface, but the mirror didn't even tremble. I wasn't just trapped. I was sealed inside, locked away in a reflection that wasn't my own anymore. The edges of the mirror stretched into nothingness, an endless void swallowing everything outside of the reflection. I had no sense of time, no feeling of my own body, only the hollow numbness of existence without substance. The thing wearing my skin turned toward the mirror, tilting its head slightly, as if it could hear me. My lips parted in silent desperation, pleading, but it only smiled wider. Then, with an infuriatingly casual motion, it reached forward and flipped the mirror around. Darkness swallowed me whole. I don't know how long I stayed in that void. There was no time here, no movement, no change. Only the deep, crushing emptiness of silence. I screamed. I screamed without sound, without breath, without anything to mark my presence. I screamed until my mind fractured, splintering into endless echoes that bounced back at me in whispers I couldn't decipher. Then a flicker, a light, distant, faint, just enough to remind me there was something beyond this nothingness. I focused on it, clawed my way toward it with willpower alone, dragging myself through the abyss of my prison. The light pulsed, growing stronger, and as I neared it, I began to hear something. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. They echoed around me, filling the void, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Then a voice. You're not the first, you know. It was close, too close, a whisper against my ear, though no breath stirred the air. I spun, though I had no real body to move, and suddenly, the darkness peeled away. I was standing in a long hallway, not the one from my home, but something older, something wrong. The walls were made of warped wood, pulsing slightly as if they were breathing. Faint light flickered from ancient sconces, casting elongated, shifting shadows that moved even when I stood still. And at the far end of the corridor stood a man, or at least, something that looked like a man. His clothes were old, too old, like something ripped straight from a century long past. His eyes, sunken and hollow, bore into me with the same knowing expression the thing in my body had worn. I took a step forward, hesitant. My body felt weightless, disconnected, like I wasn't truly standing, but merely existing in this space. "Who are you?" My voice finally returned, but it sounded distant, warped, like it wasn't truly mine. The man smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "A prisoner like you." My heart clenched. "What is this place?" His gaze flickered toward the walls, the endless hallway stretching behind him, a reflection of a reflection, a place where the unwanted are discarded. A cold dread settled over me. Discarded? Are you saying I'm stuck here forever? My voice cracked. His smile widened, though there was something hollow in it. Not forever. Hope flickered in me. Then how do I get out? The man took a step closer. You don't. The air grew heavier, thick with something unseen, something pressing against my skin like an unseen force. My breath quickened. No, I whispered. There has to be a way. He chuckled softly, a sound devoid of humor. Do you know how many of us have thought that? How many have wandered this place, searching for an escape that doesn't exist? I took another step back. The walls seemed to close in slightly, the flickering shadows lengthening. But there has to be a way. My voice trembled. There has to be something. His eyes darkened, his expression shifting. There's one way. I swallowed hard. What? His smile disappeared. You take someone else. A sick realization settled in. That thing in my body, it was once someone like me, wasn't it? His silence was answer enough. I shook my head violently. No, I won't do that. His expression remained unreadable. You say that now. I turned, searching for anything. A door, window, crack in the illusion, but there was nothing. Just endless hallway, endless flickering shadows that whispered secrets I didn't understand. Then, a flicker of movement in the mirror lining the walls. I turned sharply. I saw something that made my stomach drop. The thing in my body. It was standing in my home, living my life, talking to people, smiling, laughing, pretending to be me. I watched as it picked up my phone, dialed a number, and spoke to my mother. My mother. The rage inside me boiled over. No, that's my life. The man behind me sighed. It's already his. I spun back to face him. You said I could take someone else. My voice barely felt like my own anymore. How? His expression darkened. You already know. The weight of his words pressed against me. I had to wait. I had to lure someone, just like it had done to me. I turned back to the mirror, watching as my body, no, its body, continued to live the life it had stolen. It would go on, untouched, unnoticed, until the cycle repeated, until I found a way out. And then, in the distance, I heard the soft creak of a door opening, a new voice, uncertain, curious. Hello. A shiver ran down my spine. The hallway had shifted, revealing another mirror, another unsuspecting soul. I stepped forward and smiled. The moment I heard that voice, unsure, hesitant, just like mine had been, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. My own hesitation warred against the hunger building inside me. Not a hunger for food, not even for freedom, but for something darker. I took a slow step toward the mirror, my reflection barely responding, as if it, too, was waiting to see what I would do. The voice came again, this time closer. Hello? Is someone there? A figure emerged from the darkness of the hallway, stepping cautiously forward. I recognized the look in their eyes, confusion, fear, the desperate hope that this was all just a bad dream, just like I had felt when I first got here. The man behind me, if he was even a man, watched with a quiet intensity. He said nothing, but I could feel his gaze burning into me, waiting to see my choice. I turned back to the mirror. The thing in my body was still living my life. It was making dinner, humming softly to itself. It was comfortable, settled. It had already replaced me. Something snapped inside me. I wasn't going to let it end like this. I turned back to the person standing in the hallway. A woman, mid-20s, maybe. Her dark hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, her eyes scanning the space with a wary determination. I swallowed the last remnants of my hesitation. "You're trapped here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes snapped to mine. "What? Where am I?" I forced my expression into something softer, something that would make her trust me. "This place, it isn't real. You've been pulled into it, just like I was." Her breath hitched. No, this isn't real. This can't be real." I let out a slow breath. "I know how you feel. I thought the same thing. But look around you. Does this feel real?" She turned, taking in the hallway. The warped walls, the flickering shadows, the mirrors stretching into eternity. She hugged herself. "How do I get out?" My stomach twisted at the question. I took a careful step forward, lowering my voice into something almost kind. "There's a way." Her eyes darted to mine, desperate. "How?" The man behind me chuckled softly, but I ignored him. I pointed to the mirror. "Look." She hesitated, but stepped closer. As she did, the mirror shifted. Her reflection remained, but the background behind it changed. It wasn't this dark, endless hallway anymore. It was her home. She gasped. "What?" She reached out toward the glass, but I caught her wrist before she could touch it. She flinched, her eyes meeting mine. "I can help you," I said, "but you have to trust me." She swallowed. "Trust you? I don't even know who you are." I forced a smile. "I was just like you, but someone helped me, and now I can help you." She hesitated, but the desperation in her eyes was growing. She wanted to believe me. "Okay," she whispered. "What do I have to do?" I tightened my grip, just slightly. The man behind me chuckled again. "That's it," he murmured. "You're learning." I ignored him. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Just step forward, and take my hand." Her brow furrowed, but she didn't pull away. "That's it." I nodded. "That's it." She hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward, and the moment her fingers fully clasped mine, I yanked her forward. She didn't even have time to scream. The mirror swallowed her whole, and I felt it. I felt the shift, the unraveling of the bonds holding me in place. The weight that had anchored me here lifted, and for the first time, in what felt like eternity, I felt real. I stumbled back into my body. The sensation was overwhelming, like suddenly waking up from a dream that had gone on for too long. My skin felt too tight. My lungs burned with the sudden return of breath. My heartbeat pounded wildly against my ribs. I gasped, collapsing onto my hands and knees, my vision swimming. I was home. I was home. I looked up, breathless, at my reflection in the mirror. It was me. Me. My chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths, my fingers curling into the carpet beneath me. The thing that had taken my body, it was gone. No, not gone. Replaced. I turned slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. The mirror was just a mirror again, but behind the glass, she was there. Her eyes were wide, her mouth open in a silent scream, her hands slamming against the glass in desperate terror. I watched as she pounded and screamed, as she realized what had happened, as she realized she was trapped. I should have felt guilty. I should have, but I didn't, because I was free, and she was just another reflection now. I stared at the mirror, watching her panic, her hands slamming against the glass, her mouth opening and closing in silent screams. I could see the terror in her eyes, the desperation clawing at her, the realization sinking in. It was the same look I had when I first arrived in that place. But now I was on the other side. I was home. I was real again. And she was just a reflection, just like I had been. I should have looked away. I should have turned my back and left the room. But I didn't. Something inside me, something dark, Something that had taken root in that endless, empty place kept me watching. I leaned forward, placing my hand against the glass. She mirrored me, but this time, I wasn't the one stuck behind the surface. I saw her chest rise and fall in ragged breaths. I saw the sweat on her forehead. She was trying to scream, but no sound reached me. The mirror had swallowed her voice just as it had once swallowed mine. I wondered what she was seeing. Was she still in the hallway? Was she seeing the endless, repeating reflections stretching into infinity? Did she see me, standing there, free and real, while she was trapped in that limbo? I thought about the man who had been in the hallway with me, the one who had laughed as I made my choice. Where was he now? Had he always been like that? Had he once been like me, just another lost soul, until he learned what he had to do to escape? The thought sent a chill through me. I took a step back. Her hands pounded against the glass harder now, her face twisted in horror, her head shaking violently as if begging me to do something, to let her out. A lump formed in my throat. A part of me wanted to help her. I knew what she was feeling. I had lived it. I had felt that hopelessness, that creeping despair, the knowledge that I might never escape. I knew what it was like to have my existence stolen from me, to watch someone else live my life, while I was powerless to stop it. But I had stopped it. I had taken it back. And if I tried to help her now, what if the mirror took me back instead? What if she was the one standing here, watching me pound against the glass? No, I wouldn't let that happen. I turned away, forcing myself to walk out of the room, my legs heavy with the weight of my own choice. I made it to the hallway before I stopped, my heart pounding against my ribs. The air felt thick, like the walls themselves were pressing in on me. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. Then I heard it, a soft creak. I turned my head sharply, my pulse spiking. The mirror. I had left the door open, just a crack, and through the sliver of space, I saw it. A hand, pressing against the inside of the glass. Not hers, not the girl I had trapped. Someone else. The hand was pale, almost translucent, with long, bony fingers that tapped slowly, rhythmically, against the surface. Tap, tap, tap. I couldn't move. Then, as if sensing my gaze, the fingers curled slightly, dragging downward, leaving streaks against the glass, as if it were fogged up from the inside. I wanted to run. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to move, to get away from that mirror. But I couldn't. My feet felt rooted to the floor. My breath caught in my throat. Then I saw it. A face. No eyes. Just darkness where they should have been. The mouth stretched too wide. The lips curling into something that should have been a smile, but felt more like a wound. It was looking at me. Or through me. I stumbled back, crashing into the hallway wall. My breath came in short gasps. My fingers dug into the wallpaper, my skin damp with sweat. The figure behind the glass pressed its face closer, its hands flattening against the surface. It didn't pound or scream. It just watched. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I was in my bedroom. The door slammed shut behind me. My chest heaved as I pressed my back against the wood, my heart hammering. What was that? Had it always been there? Had it been watching me this whole time? I swallowed hard, forcing my thoughts into something resembling order. I was out. That was what mattered. I was out, and I was real again. I just had to forget about the mirror. Forget about her. Forget about it. I forced myself to move, peeling my damp shirt from my back as I stepped toward the bathroom. The light was too bright, almost unnatural after so long in the dim emptiness of that other place. My reflection stared back at me from the mirror above the sink. It was still me. I turned on the faucet, splashing cold water on my face. The shock of it helped. It grounded me, reminded me that this was real. I was real. I gripped the edges of the sink, taking slow, measured breaths. Then I looked up and froze. The reflection wasn't looking at me. Not directly. Its eyes were slightly off, not quite meeting mine. A shiver ran down my spine. Slowly, I lifted my hand. The reflection mimicked me perfectly. I turned my head slightly to the left. So did it. I leaned closer. So did it. Everything was as it should be. But something felt wrong. Like there was something else in the mirror with me. Watching. waiting. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to step back. I wasn't going to let this consume me. I wasn't going to fall into paranoia. I had won. I was free. That was all that mattered. I turned off the light and walked out of the bathroom. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, I heard it. A whisper. Faint, almost inaudible. But it wasn't coming from the bathroom. It was coming from the bedroom mirror. My pulse spiked. I turned slowly, my body rigid. The mirror stood against the far wall, its surface dark in the dim light. I took a shaky step forward, my breath shallow. The whispering continued. Soft, insistent. Words I couldn't quite make out. I reached out with trembling fingers. Then, a hand slammed against the glass from the inside. I yelped, stumbling back. The whispering stopped. The room was silent. The handprint remained, smeared against the surface. And slowly, the darkness behind the glass began to shift. A face emerged. Not hers. Not the thing from before. Something else. Something I didn't recognize. But it recognized me. Its lips curled. And then, in a voice that sent ice through my veins, it whispered, "Did you really think it was over?" The house sat at the edge of the forest, untouched for years. Nobody knew why it had remained abandoned for so long. Some said it had been a crime scene. Others believed it was cursed. But to Ethan, it was an opportunity. He had just moved to town and was desperate for a cheap place to stay. The house was perfect, cheap rent, spacious, and secluded. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses. He believed in saving money. The first few nights were uneventful. The place was eerily quiet, but that was expected. There was no traffic, no neighbors close enough to make a sound. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. But on the fourth night, things changed. Ethan was lying in bed when he heard it, a soft creaking noise from the hallway. He dismissed it as the old house, settling, and rolled over, pulling the blanket over his head. Then the whispering started. It was faint, almost as if someone was talking right outside his room. The words were unintelligible, just a murmur in the dark. Ethan sat up, his heart hammering. He reached for his phone, turning on the flashlight, and aimed it at the door. Nothing. He walked out into the hallway, the light casting long shadows against the walls. Still nothing. But as he turned back towards his bedroom, he saw it. The attic door was slightly ajar. Ethan knew for a fact that he hadn't touched it since moving in. He swallowed hard, debating whether to check it out. He told himself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the wind, maybe he had left a window open. Gathering his courage, he climbed the narrow attic ladder and peeked inside. The attic was empty, just old furniture and dust-covered boxes. But as he turned to leave, something caught his eye. A single wooden rocking chair sat in the corner, rocking ever so slightly. He felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. He took a step closer, and suddenly, the whispering returned, this time louder, clearer. "He sees you." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He spun around, pointing his flashlight in every direction. No one was there. His hands trembled as he hurried down the ladder, slamming the attic door shut behind him. That night, he barely slept, his mind racing with explanations. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. The next day, he convinced himself it was just an overactive imagination. He went about his routine as usual, but as night fell, the house seemed different, colder. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. He tried to shake it off, but the feeling lingered. He locked his bedroom door, something he hadn't done before. Just as he was drifting off, the bed creaked. He froze. It wasn't just the house settling this time. It was deliberate, controlled. Then he felt it, something shifting at the foot of his bed. His stomach tightened. Slowly, he reached for his phone, gripping it like a lifeline. He turned the flashlight on and aimed it toward his feet. Nothing. Relief washed over him. He exhaled sharply, feeling foolish. But just as he lowered his phone, his screen reflected something behind him. A shape, a figure. He spun around, but the room was empty. His breathing grew ragged. He wasn't alone. Something was in the house. He barely slept, his body stiff with fear. When the sun finally rose, he packed his things. He needed to leave. He didn't care about the rent. He'd rather be homeless than spend another night there. But when he reached for the front door, it wouldn't open. The lock twisted. The handle refused to budge. It was as if the house itself wouldn't let him go. Panic set in. He tried the windows. Nailed shut. His breathing quickened. He grabbed a chair and smashed it against the glass, but the impact barely made a scratch. That's when he heard it again, the whispering. Except this time, it was different. It was laughter. The air in the room grew thick, suffocating. The walls seemed to close in around him. He ran to his phone, trying to call for help, but there was no signal. The laughter grew louder, echoing through the house. He turned, and that's when he saw them. Figures, dozens of them, standing in the corners of the room, their faces obscured by darkness. They didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched. A voice, deep and guttural, cut through the laughter. "You're home now." The room went black. Ethan's breath hitched in his throat. Darkness swallowed everything. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, his skin prickling with cold terror. The whispering had stopped, but the presence in the room had not vanished. He felt them, dozens of unseen eyes boring into him. Then a single, deliberate creak echoed through the silence. Ethan scrambled for his phone, his fingers shaking so violently he almost dropped it. The flashlight flickered to life, slicing through the suffocating blackness. The figures were gone. The room was empty, as if they had never been there. But the door, his only escape, stood wide open. His breath came in short gasps. He didn't trust it. A trap. It had to be. But he couldn't stay. Every instinct screamed for him to run. He bolted through the door. The hallway stretched longer than he remembered. The dim glow of his phone barely illuminated the peeling wallpaper, the floorboards groaning under his every step. The air felt thick, heavy, pressing against his chest like unseen hands. He reached the staircase and took the steps 2 at a time, his pulse hammering. Then he heard it, a soft dragging sound. From above, his blood ran cold. Slowly, he turned his head back toward the attic door. It was open again. The ladder dangled into the hallway, swaying ever so slightly, as if something had just climbed down. A single whisper brushed against his ear. "Stay." Ethan lunged forward, nearly stumbling as he reached the front door. His fingers fumbled with the lock. It was still jammed. He twisted the handle violently, rattling it in desperation. The dragging sound grew closer. Ethan turned, his flashlight flickering. A shape stood at the top of the stairs. It was tall, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its hollow eyes locked onto his. His stomach dropped. It moved, not walked, glided, straight for him. A raw scream tore from his throat as he threw himself against the door. He banged his fists, his voice cracking in sheer panic. "Let me out." The walls trembled. The whispers swelled into a deafening roar. The creature was almost upon him. Then silence. The door burst open. Ethan collapsed onto the porch, gasping for air. The morning sun burned against his skin, making his eyes water. The house loomed behind him, quiet and still, as if nothing had happened. He didn't look back. He ran. Ethan never returned for his belongings. He rented a motel room in town, refusing to be alone after dark. He barely ate, barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the figures, heard the whispers. A week passed, then another. The nightmares never stopped. One evening, as he scrolled through his phone, desperate for distraction. An old news article caught his eye. Local man missing after moving into abandoned house. His breath hitched. The date was over 15 years ago. The man's name was David Langley. The article detailed how he had moved into the house, only to disappear without a trace weeks later. The police had searched the property, but found nothing. No signs of a struggle. No body. Just an empty house. Ethan's stomach twisted. At the bottom of the article was a photo. A grainy image of David Langley, smiling, unaware of what awaited him. Ethan's phone slipped from his hands, because he had seen that face before. Not in a newspaper, not online, but in the reflection of his phone screen. Standing right behind him, Ethan's body went rigid. His breath caught in his throat, his pulse hammering like a drum inside his skull. Slowly, so slowly, he turned his head, dreading what he would see. Nothing. The room was empty, but he knew what he had seen. The reflection, the face of David Langley, smiling just inches behind him. A cold shiver raked down his spine as he grabbed his phone with trembling fingers. The screen was cracked from the fall, but it still worked. He checked the reflection again. Just his own pale, terrified face staring back. His paranoia was eating him alive. He needed to get out, to leave this town, to pretend none of this had ever happened. But deep down he knew it wasn't over. He didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside his motel room made him jolt. He kept the lights on, his phone clenched in his hand like a lifeline. The air felt thick, pressing, as though something unseen was watching him. Around 3 a.m., exhaustion finally pulled him under, and that's when the dream came. At first, it was nothing but darkness. Then a whisper, faint at first, then louder. More voices joined in, rising and falling in an eerie, rhythmic chant. Then he saw it, the house, not how he remembered it, but older, untouched by time. The paint was fresh, the windows intact, and inside the front window, a face stared back at him. David Langley. Ethan wanted to run, but his body wouldn't move. The front door creaked open. The house called to him. Come back. A violent jolt ripped him from sleep. His heart was a drum inside his chest. Sweat clung to his skin. His phone buzzed beside him, the screen glowing eerily in the darkness. Unknown number. His stomach turned. Every instinct told him not to answer, but he did. At first, nothing. Just static. Then a whisper. You left too soon. Ethan's blood turned to ice. He ended the call and threw the phone across the room. His breaths came in short gasps as he stared at the device, afraid it would ring again. Silence. Then a knock. On the motel door. Ethan stopped breathing. Another knock. Louder. Shaking. He crept toward the door, pressing his eye against the peephole. No one was there. His stomach twisted into knots. Then another knock. This time from inside the room. Behind him. Ethan spun around so fast he nearly tripped. The bathroom door stood ajar, swinging slightly. Something was inside. He backed away, gripping the doorknob, ready to bolt. But the second he turned it, the lights flickered and died. Darkness swallowed the room whole. Then the whispering returned. You can't leave. Ethan lunged for the door, twisting, pulling, yanking, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering grew louder, surrounding him, filling the air, filling his head. Then a breath, warm, right against his ear. He screamed. The lights flickered back on. The room was empty, the door wide open. Ethan didn't hesitate. He ran. By sunrise, Ethan had reached the next town over. He checked into a new motel, exhausted but wired with fear. He needed answers. He scoured the internet for any mention of the house. Something had happened there, something no one talked about. Finally, after hours of digging, He found it. An old police report. 1978. A family had lived there. A couple and their young daughter. One night, the father snapped. He slaughtered his wife and child before disappearing. His body was never found. The house sat empty for decades, until David Langley moved in. Ethan's blood ran cold. A comment on the report caught his eye. They never left. They're still in that house. They make you see things, hear things, until you belong to them. His hands shook as he scrolled further. The last comment made his stomach drop. If you've been inside, it's already too late. Ethan's vision blurred. His ears rang. The air in the motel room felt thick, suffocating. He needed to leave. Now. But then his phone screen glitched. A single message appeared. You forgot something. His body locked up. A photo loaded onto the screen. It was a picture of him, sitting on the motel bed. But the background wasn't the motel. It was the house. And behind him, in the reflection of the cracked mirror, David Langley was smiling. Ethan's breath hitched in his throat. His mind screamed at him that this couldn't be real. His motel room felt suffocating, the walls seeming to inch closer. His hands trembled as he stared at the photo. His heart pounded so violently he thought it might burst. This isn't real. It had to be a trick, a glitch. Someone was messing with him, but he knew better. His body refused to move, frozen by the growing dread that something was here with him. The silence in the room became unbearable, heavy, thick, unnatural. He could hear every breath he took, every rustle of his clothes as he shifted slightly on the bed. Then tap, 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 fingernails, dragging along the motel mirror. Ethan's stomach twisted. The mirror was behind him. He refused to turn, but his body betrayed him. Slowly, his gaze drifted toward the reflection in his phone screen. And there he was, David Langley, standing inches behind him, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, eyes hollow, empty, yet somehow full of something terrible. That same twisted, lifeless smile stretched across his face. Ethan's scream lodged in his throat. His fight-or-flight instincts took over. He lunged off the bed, grabbing his keys, not caring about anything except getting out. But when he turned to the door, it was gone. The walls shifted, warped, melted into something else. The motel wasn't a motel anymore. It was the house, the rotting wallpaper, the dark, stretching hallway, the peeling wooden floors that creaked under unseen footsteps. He had never left. Or worse, he had been brought back. The whispers returned, growing, overlapping, surrounding him. You can't run. You left too soon. You belong here. Ethan stumbled backward, his mind spiraling, fighting against what he was seeing. He squeezed his eyes shut, breathing hard. This was a hallucination, a nightmare. He just needed to wake up. Something cold brushed against his arm. His eyes snapped open. David was inches from his face. Ethan's throat seized, his scream bursting out as he shoved the figure away. But his hands passed through nothing. Laughter, low, distorted, echoing, not just from David, from all around him. Ethan spun, his flashlight flickering wildly. Figures stood in the hallway, shifting in the darkness, their faces blurred, twitching wrong. They were all here. The family, the mother, the child, and the father. The thing that had done this. The thing that had taken David. That had taken everyone who entered this house. And now it wanted Ethan. His body reacted before his mind did. He ran. The hallway stretched. The walls pulsed as if they were breathing. The house was alive. It wouldn't let him go. The front door came into view. It was open, wide open, a trap, or a chance. He didn't care. He lunged for it. Slam. The door vanished before he could reach it. The house laughed, and the father stepped forward. His face was obscured in darkness, but Ethan could feel the malice radiating off of him. The thing wasn't human anymore. Maybe it never had been. Ethan backed away, shaking, his body trembling with cold fear. "Please," he choked out, the father's head tilted, as if considering him. Then it whispered, "Give in." The walls shifted again. The air tightened around him, pushing, suffocating. Ethan's vision blurred. His head spun. The world faded. And then, silence. When Ethan opened his eyes, he was back in the motel. Morning light streamed through the thin curtains. The air was normal, calm. For a long moment, he just lay there, his body stiff, his throat raw, his mind reeled, trying to process. A dream, a hallucination, but then he saw his phone, and the new message on the screen, "Welcome home." And in the mirror across the room, David Langley stood behind him, smiling.
Wanted something from me, something I didn't know if I could give. I don't remember how I got away that night. One moment, it was there, its cold fingers on my face, and the next I was on the floor, gasping for air, the kitchen empty and silent. But I knew it wasn't over. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. And I had no idea what that was. I started researching, scouring the internet for anything that might explain what was happening to me. I found stories of people who had experienced similar things. Whispers in the dark, shadowy figures, cold spots in their homes, but none of them had answers. Some of them had disappeared, their stories ending abruptly, as if they had been snatched away in the middle of the night. Others had gone mad, their minds shattered by whatever they had seen. I didn't know which fate was worse. And then one night I found something. It was an old forum post, buried deep in the archives of a site I had never heard of before. The post was from someone who claimed to have experienced the same thing I was going through. They said the figure was a harbinger, a messenger from a place beyond our understanding, and that it had chosen me for a reason. They didn't say what that reason was, but they warned me not to ignore it. "It will keep coming," they wrote, "until you give it what it wants. And if you don't, it will take you instead." I read the post over and over, my hands shaking, until the words blurred together. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to fight something I couldn't even understand. But I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't keep living like this. I had to find a way to stop it before it was too late. The whispers grew louder after that, more insistent, as if the thing knew I was trying to resist it. It started appearing more frequently, not just at night, but during the day as well, always just out of sight, always watching. I stopped sleeping altogether, too afraid to close my eyes, too afraid of what I might see when I opened them again. I started to lose track of time, the days blending together in a haze of fear and exhaustion. And then one night it happened. I was in the living room, staring at the TV but not really watching it, when I felt the familiar cold prickling on the back of my neck. I turned around, and there it was, standing in the doorway, its blank face tilted slightly to the side, as if it were waiting for me to do something. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling, and took a step forward. It didn't move, didn't react, just stood there watching me. And then, for the first time, I spoke to it. "What do you want?" My voice was barely above a whisper, but it sounded impossibly loud in the silence. The figure didn't respond, didn't move, but I could feel its presence, heavy and oppressive, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I took another step forward, my heart pounding in my ears, and repeated the question. "What do you want from me?" This time it reacted. Its head tilted further to the side, and I felt a wave of cold air wash over me, so intense that it knocked me off my feet. I hit the floor hard, the breath knocked out of me, and when I looked up, the figure was gone. But I could still feel it, lingering in the air, waiting. And then I heard it, faint but unmistakable, a single word whispered in that low, guttural voice. "Remember." I don't know how long I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Remember? Remember what? I didn't know what it meant, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't going to stop until I figured out what it wanted. And I had a feeling that the answer was buried somewhere in my past, in a memory I had long since buried. But I didn't know if I was ready to face it. I didn't know if I could, but I didn't have a choice. The whispers were growing louder, more insistent, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the figure returned. And when it did, I had to be ready. I had to remember. My hands. The symbols on the walls were gone, the bones back on the floor, and the air was still. I looked down at the knife, its blade cold and sharp under my fingers, and I knew I had made a terrible mistake. The knife was alive. I could feel it pulsing in my hands, its presence a low, insistent hum in the back of my mind. It was filled with power, with the ability to cut through anything, even the fabric of reality itself. But it came at a cost. The house had given it to me, and now it wanted something in return. I didn't know what, but I knew it wouldn't be long before I found out. I tucked the knife into my belt and turned to leave the room, but the door was gone. The walls were solid, the symbols gone, and I was trapped. I pounded on the walls, my fists leaving bloody smears on the surface, but it was no use. The house had me, and it wasn't going to let me go. I sank to the floor, the knife clutched to my chest, and waited for whatever was coming next. The darkness closed in around me, the air growing colder, and I knew I was running out of time. The house was alive, and it was hungry, and I was its next meal. The days, or maybe it was weeks, blurred together in that room. Time became meaningless, measured only by the growing ache in my bones and the gnawing hunger in my stomach. The knife remained in my hands, its presence a constant, oppressive weight. I tried to use it once to cut my way out of the room, but the moment I pressed the blade against the wall, a wave of nausea and dread washed over me. The symbols on the walls began to glow, their light blinding, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever. I dropped the knife, my hands trembling, and vowed not to touch it again. But the house had other plans. The whispers never truly left me. They lingered in the corners of my mind, their voices soft but persistent. They spoke of power, of freedom, of things I could barely comprehend. They promised me escape, but only if I gave in, only if I accepted the knife and what it offered. I tried to resist, to hold on to the last shreds of my sanity, but the darkness was relentless. It wore me down, piece by piece, until I could no longer remember why I was fighting. And then, one day or night, it was impossible to tell, the door reappeared. It was there just as suddenly as it had vanished, standing open and inviting. I didn't trust it, didn't trust anything in this house, but I had no choice. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. I stood, my legs stiff and unsteady, and stepped through the door. The hallway beyond was different. The walls were no longer covered in smooth, black stone, but in rough, jagged rock that seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly light. The air was colder, the scent of decay stronger, and I could feel the presence of something watching me. I moved slowly, my footsteps echoing in the stillness, the knife clutched tightly to my chest. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the darkness pressing in from all sides, but I kept moving. I had to. And then I saw it, a light at the end of the hallway. It was faint, barely more than a flicker, but it was enough to give me hope. I moved toward it, my steps quickening despite the fear that clawed at my chest. The light grew brighter as I approached, revealing a door at the end of the hallway. It was slightly ajar, the light spilling out from the crack. I reached out, my hand trembling as I pushed the door open. The room beyond was unlike anything I had ever seen. The walls were covered in strange symbols, their shapes twisting and writhing as if alive. The floor was littered with bones, their surfaces smooth and yellowed with age. In the center of the room was a table, its surface stained with dark